You'd expect that a game that was developed by the composer of To the Moon and Plants vs. Zombies would make a bigger splash than it did. Unfortunately, Rakuen released right in the middle of PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds' gigantic hype wave and came out really quietly, despite its great reception from critics. Rakuen only has 4 reviews on Metacritic, but it's currently rated as the 5th best game this year. That puts it above Nier Automata, Resident Evil 7, and Yakuza 0, all 3 of which are currently Game of the Year contenders. What is this little game that could? And is it worth the accolades it's received? This is Quint Iverson for Blue Backspace. Today we're looking at Rakuen, a game directed by Laura Shigihara over the course of 4 years of development time. Rakuen is an exploration and story-heavy game created in RPG Maker. There are no battles, no experience systems, and no forms of mechanical character progression. Just a lot of story, puzzles, and exploration in a vivid world. The problem with Rakuen is that its first 2 hours really like to show you the game's flaws before it shows you the beauty. In order to show you how, I'm going to disassemble it piece by piece. Let's start with the game's music. Not only because it's the game's main selling point, but it's also the most obvious way to hear the game's flaws. The track that almost the entirety of the first hour of Rakuen takes place in sticks out like a sore thumb. It desperately needs physical instrumentation in order to make it feel more alive as a song, and it chooses to resolve in its last few seconds over looping, making it really annoying to listen to on its 5th repeat. On top of that, the song doesn't really fit the tone the story lands in this location. It sounds blank and relaxing, more like a menu theme than the bleakness with lights of hope that the story conveys. Take a listen to the song's last few measures. It's not bad, sure, but it's a little disappointing given Shigihara's previous catalog. But then, about 2.5 hours into the game, a song titled The Keepers plays, and all of a sudden, everything makes sense. Something really powerful actually happened when the song played. A switch flipped in my head, and I started to see the beauty of Rakuen beyond its flaws. Everything in the game suddenly paled in comparison to the beauty of this moment. And then the rest of the game was that moment, elongated over 6 more hours. The dialogue, previously stuck in Shigihara's voice with little variation, began to build an interesting roster of characters, all with their own quirks and problems. The opening hour of the game, foolishly, is focused on interacting with minor characters in the game over major ones, the former of which you never need to interact with after that opening hour and are largely one-dimensional. The aesthetics, first feeling bland and stuck in their engine, quickly, upon the move to Rakuen, begin to colorfully pop in comparison to the beautiful desaturation and bleakness of the first hour. Rakuen, the world, not the game, is very alive and very colorful, full of multiple landscapes that all feel different from one another. The puzzles, at first frustrating fetch quests that require you to search every nook and cranny to get anywhere, now served as flavorful little obstructions to where I needed to go next, and sometimes stressful or anxiety-producing sections to ramp up tension. There are some frustrating fenchy portions and some moon logic, but they can easily be avoided by simply collecting things as you run into them. The story, once predictable and with little foreshadowing or lead-up to events, now felt as though it was a pure emotional roller coaster. Characters have interesting and heartbreaking backstories that the game presents to you in generally interesting ways, messing with the RPG Maker engine to make them happen. The overarching plot surrounding those backstories isn't much more than a shell for you to explore them and land in an ending, but the backstories are more than emotional enough to make up for it. And one moment in the story is extremely well led up to and well put together when it's reached, so I don't know if I can put a strike against the story when it landed so well at the end. Basically, everything in Rakuen is lackluster until one moment strikes you down and forces you to see the beauty residing around you. So, let's talk about how the game lets that happen. First, plot points in Rakuen seem to come directly from Shigihara's past. I don't want to expound for fear of spoiling you, but trust me when I say it'll be obvious. That exploration really lets Shigihara get up close and personal with her topics, and I feel like it really clarifies and emboldens the emotion behind them as a result. Above everything, Rakuen is a story about letting go. So maybe it makes sense that Laura would use it as a place to resolve her own past. Speaking of story, Rakuen knows what it is and uses that to its advantage. Remember how I said earlier that Rakuen's story is predictable? That's a purposeful move. Interactions with other characters are blissful, charming, heartwarming, and above all, sweet. Rakuen's reward for character interaction isn't digital items. It's the genuine thanks you get from the characters that reside in its world. Those sweet as sugar interactions meld with the generally sad tone of the story to build something that feels bittersweet with every chance it gets since it gets its hooks into you. It's a really rare tone in games, so it's really appreciated. It certainly helps that tone that the world behind it is built so colorfully. Rakuen's art manages not only to create a fantasy world that breaks out of its engine's 480p restrictions to create something much brighter, but also built a great contrast between the main fantasy world the game takes place in and the real world that anchors the game to the ground. Again, not to spoil anything, but Shigehara really knows what she's doing here too. There were some great vignettes and moments that bring the contrast between worlds to life. Rakuen is a game that is flawed but beautiful. No part of the game is perfectly polished, put together to modern standards, or without glaring flaw, but the game has more than enough moments that practically exude emotion to make up for it. If you're able to make it through the game's slow first 2 hours, the world you'll find behind it is more than worth the time sink it takes to actually get there. I cried. Actual, real tears, mind you, not just watery-eyed, holding back tears crying. Twice in the last 2 hours of the game's plot, and I'm 90% certain that there's a sequence that will make me cry full-on tears every time I watch it. Rakuen lands emotions hard, especially near its ending moments. If you're at all interested in narratively focused games, build a little world with me and give Rakuen a shot.